If you have Professor Castillo as a student, then introducing him at this point seems redundant. Because there's probably very little I can tell you. For those of you who don't know Darrell, who I now consider to be not just a colleague, but a very good friend, Darrell earned his bachelor's degree in political science from UT. Thank you. His master's degree in history from UT. Double welcome. Fears a little bit, goes to the University of North Texas, his degree in political science, his master's there. All right, it's done. It's cool. His honorary PhD in international relations from George Mason University. A staffer for U.S. Senator John Tower, for Congressman James Collins, and a special assistant to the President's National Security Council for Ronald Reagan. Been a professor of political science since 1989. He's taught at Dallas County Community Colleges, Tarrant County Community College, Paul Quinn College, United States Command and General Staff College, and now Weatherford College. Partner in Sonic Research Board Corporation, a high-tech company involved in oil well remediation. You'll have to ask Darrell about that, and that's a lecture maybe someday you can give. It's an interesting area. And generally a zombie fan, so if that doesn't come up in this lecture, I'm going to be super disappointed.
It already has before you got here.
Yes. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, my colleague and my good friend, Darrell Castillo.
Thank you. There's an old Russian proverb about this gentleman. He's a farmer. This is quite some time ago, and he's having trouble with the shutters in his one-room shack of a farmhouse back 1700s. And he goes to the wise man in the village, and he tells him about his problem. He says, you know, I'm having these shutters banging against the wall in the morning, evening, and night because the wind's howling, and I don't know what to do. And the wise man tells him, you know, you need to bring in some chickens. So he goes, brings the chickens in from the yard, and the chickens are there with him in that one-room shack, and they're clucking and clucking and clucking in the shack. Shutters and shutters are banging. He goes, oh, this is worse. So he goes back to the wise man, and he says, no, you didn't solve my problem. So the wise man says, you know what? Bring your cow in. So he brings the cow into the one-room shack, and he's got the chickens and the cow and the shutters, and the cow's mooing all night long, especially since it needs to be milked in the morning. It's just mooing. He says, oh, this is bad. This isn't solving the problem. So he goes back to the wise man, and he says, look, it's even worse. And so the wise man says, oh, I tell you what, just remove the chickens and remove the cow. And he does. And now the shutters don't sound as bad anymore. And it's not as bad as it used to be. I use this little story to, and I've used it at the Command and General Staff College also. I use a story to illustrate this point. And is Daniel? No, Daniel's giving a lecture right now. Davenport said this to me, a colleague also. He said something earlier. He says, you know, when you talk about the use of nuclear weapons, and you look at the carnage that's going on anyway, the use of nuclear weapons doesn't sound as bad. The end result is going to be the same. It's going to be destruction and carnage. I have postulated over the years in the Reagan administration, and I almost took a position as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Logistics in the Trump administration, but I like Weatherford College better. And I have always postulated, especially when I was on the National Security Council, nuclear warfare. We war game this, we war game this, we war game this, and we war game this. And it does give you sometimes a bit of a nightmare, and we were required as part of the job to go see a shrink once a week. Okay? I didn't take it seriously because he threw me out of his office because I asked him when he was going to ask me if I loved my mother or not. I mean, they want to see whether you're sane or not, okay? Because that's all we're dealing with is with nuclear war. But I postulate this to individuals who may not be aware of this. Is nuclear war in itself a bad thing? is postulating the fact that we might have to fight one a bad thing. No, not necessarily. There are those of us who postulate the fact that it may be possible to fight one, and it may be possible to win one. Okay? Having said that, let us look at the dynamic of the structure of the planet in which a nuclear war might take place. And Nick covered some of this in his previous lecture, and I said, you know, Nick, you and I probably need to do a joint lecture on some of the things that you've talked about and that I will talk about. The world security system has changed over time. It continues to change. Sorry. It continues to change, and we have to think about the unthinkable. The world security system is naturally multipolar. In other words, there are many centers of power, and we name the center of power after its capital, right? So in a multipolar world security system, the poles of power would be Berlin, Beijing, Moscow, Paris, Washington, etc. This is normal. This is the norm. Okay? After the period from after this period, but the period 1945 to 1989, we entered a new security system. This is called the Cold War period. But we entered a new security system known as a bipolar world. Now I illustrate this for you to compare an historical event for the historians in this classroom. A multipolar world is inherently dangerous. It's dangerous, and then again I want to say, if we're going to study nuclear warfare, we have to understand World War I. Those are the two most readily comparable historical events. World War I starts off accidentally, just like a nuclear war in any future scenario will start off accidentally. So to understand gaming a nuclear war, you have to understand World War I. You have two power blocks, very similar to this bipolar situation. You have two power blocks, the Entente on one side, and the Central Powers on the other. And of course, this Entente is led by the United Kingdom, the French, and the Italians at one point. Over here we have Germany, Imperial Germany, and Austria-Hungary, which was an empire at that time. Okay. And you have, most importantly, you have Russia on the side of the Entente powers. Wars start by accident, and that's the fear of international relations, people like myself, that it may not be a direct confrontation between the United States and some minor power. It may be that, and I of course postulate North Korea and a confrontation with them. I think this is quite funny. I just got through reading the 2020 Commission report on the North Korean nuclear attack against the United States. Did everybody catch that? The 2020 Commission report on the North Korean nuclear attack against the United States. It makes for a fun read. It's obviously science fiction. I'm a science fiction buff, but when I saw that cover, I said, let me pick it up. You know. So these powers did not start wars with each other directly. Okay. The Austrian-Hungarians coveted an area in the Balkans, which is alive and well today. and Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, these little countries that are constantly at odds with each other even today. Austria-Hungary coveted a province known as, a country known as Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is still around today. And state-sponsored terrorism is not new. Okay? It's old, okay? And the Serbs, there was a Serbia, there still is a Serbia, they state-sponsored a terrorist attack that killed the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, Franz Ferdinand, okay? And so when Franz Ferdinand, the heir apparent to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, was assassinated, and it was messy. I mean, it was 3 attempts. You know, it was in an open car. It's like John F. Kennedy's assassination. You don't go there. You're in an open vehicle. Same scenario. He didn't mind. You know, he didn't listen to the warnings. Went anyway. Got assassinated. Okay. And it was really messy. Well, the Austrian-Hungarians are like really ticked off at this, right? So I use this kind of this analogy. I have never participated, but I have been in a barroom fight. I've seen them. Okay, I was there when it happened, and I got under the table very quickly. Right? But here's how it goes with a barroom fight, right? Somebody picks a fight with somebody. And then their buddy says, hey, I got your back, right? So all of a sudden, these 2 guys, maybe girls, I don't know, are fighting, and then somebody else jumps in. Because that person jumps in, another friend from the other side jumps in, and then it becomes a free-for-all. Everybody understand what I just said? If you haven't seen it or participated in that, you probably will at one point in your life. It may not be as violent as that. It may just be a contest of words, but it's the same thing. It amounts to the same thing, right? Violence is violence, whether it's verbal or physical, right? So that's exactly what happens, okay? So Austria-Hungary is going to go after the Serbs, and when it does that, the Serbs, who are Slavic ethnically, that's an ethnic group, they appeal to the Russians. So the Russians say, if you attack Serbia, which Austria-Hungary is going to do, because they state-sponsor, it's been proven, they were the state sponsor of that terrorist attack. If Russia declares war on Austria, if Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, the Russians are going to declare war on Austria-Hungary. They do. Okay? They attack them because they're friends. Russia attacks Austria-Hungary. Okay? When this happens, there's a treaty between Austria-Hungary and Germany. Germany declares war on Russia. Because there is a treaty between France and Russia, France declares war on Germany. Everybody see where this is going? Okay. Because the Germans, in order to get to the French, which they have to knock out of the war first, go through Belgian territory to get to the French, the British declare war on Germany. Everybody's got this barroom fight in an international scenario, macro sense, okay? I said all that to say this. In the Cold War period from 1945 to 1989, this doesn't happen. There's only 2 centers of power. The United States and the Soviet Union. This is an anomaly. This is something that has never taken place at any time in the world international order. And it only lasted from 1945 to 1989 because Moscow and Washington kept all these powers who had gone to war before with each other from doing it again. They chose sides in 2 power blocks. You either were with the West or you were with the communist East. Okay? And what kept the peace? What was the boogeyman, or in my culture, the Hispanic culture, the kukui? What was the kukui that kept the peace on the planet, right? Nuclear weapons. The United States and the Soviet Union were going to go head-to-head. Now, we did by proxy. We supplied the Israelis with weapons, the conventional weapons, to fight the innumerable number of wars with the Arabs, and the Soviets supplied the Arabs, and so we had a nice little test bed to test our weapon systems. But we never, Vietnam, another example, it was indirect. Of course, we went there, we shouldn't have, to test weapon systems. They're nice testing grounds, but at no time were the 2 superpowers, this is a new term, the two superpowers, they weren't at odds with each other. We never confronted them directly. We never did. We didn't want to. They didn't want to. And that pretty much kept the peace in the world. John Lewis Gaddis, political scientist, historian. I've met John. He's a really interesting guy. He wrote a book about 20 years ago, and the title of that book is The Long Peace. And Gaddis postulates that, well, he says, and he names it the Long Peace. He names this period the Long Peace. It's no longer, we no longer want to call it the Cold War. We call it the Long Peace because this is the longest period in recorded history where main powers on the planet did not go to war with each other, the major players on the planet, and certainly not the players that were involved in World War I, same players, or World War II, same players. Okay? They never went to war with each other ever again. So he's calling this the Long Peace, this period that you and I call the Cold War. He's renamed it the Long Peace. Now, let's define peace, okay? Peace at this point means that the major powers on the planet never went to war with each other, right? Lewis is, of course, discounting, Gaddis is, of course, discounting the innumerable number of wars in Africa, the Vietnam War, the wars in the Middle East, the 20 to 22 million people over that same period who lost their lives in those wars because they were not direct confrontations between the two superpowers. Okay? So we can still, if we keep within that definition of peace, it's peace, okay? Because good white people didn't kill each other. It was only the people with dark skin killed each other. Right? And so the problem, however, from an historical perspective and a political science perspective, is that this period is over. When these people imploded, we are now back to a multipolar world. We are back to that. This is 1991 to today. We are back to this situation, okay? And it is perhaps unfortunate that we have this scenario again, but with nuclear weapons. An argument can be made that the world was, even though there was a nuclear arms race, that the world was infinitely safer during this period than a return to the old multipolar world, because with the breakup of this country, the implosion of this country, and the additional members of the nuclear club, we're in a very, very dangerous situation. And nuclear war is not only possible, it is probable. In fact, I think it's highly probable that a nuclear war would take place, especially with a confrontational president that we have today. You know, President Trump will not back down. He leaves the table in negotiations. Okay, now make no mistake, I'm a nationalist. I'll always put the United States over anybody else, as long as I live and breathe. But you know, if you're too confrontational, you know, what do? You push the button. There is no button, but you know what I'm saying. You push the nuclear button because the North Koreans now have joined the nuclear club, okay? And there will be others who will join the nuclear club. And so what does the United States do? Get into a contest with a small nuclear power and push the button? President Trump doesn't seem to have a problem with that. Right? Another thing that we need to look at, and this is just a structural viewpoint, another thing we need to look at is what might cause a nuclear war without U.S. involvement. Okay? The nuclear power club that keeps growing with its latest entrants, the North Koreans, it may not involve U.S. nuclear weapons. It may involve a war with nuclear powers that will go to war with each other without U.S. involvement. And so there are some hot spots in this world that we need to look at. First and foremost, is a possible confrontation between nuclear-armed India, which is a democracy, and nuclear-armed Pakistan, which is not a democracy. Okay. And remember, democracies never go to war with democracies. That is an historical imperative. Only totalitarian regimes go to war with democracies. Democracies never go to war with each other. Okay? So that is a possible hotspot. Now, I'm going to offend some people in this room by this next statement. Okay? People like me do not see that as a problem. If war, and they're constantly sniping at each other, and they go to war with each other, the Indians and the Pakistanis. But if it goes nuclear, people like me wouldn't have a problem with that. Because right over the border is the breadbasket of China. And winds go west to east. We solve many problems there. They blow each other to hell, and Chinese food supply is irradiated. As an American nationalist, I don't see a problem with that. Not at all. And I'm sure the Trump administration doesn't see a problem with that either. Having said that, okay, and I mean, I know my humor may be a little macabre, but there are some things that we need to look at, right? Some real things. And one of them is the survival of the United States. How does this affect the culture? How has this period affected the culture of the United States? Some of us in this room are old enough to remember the old duck and cover drills. Anybody remember those? I remember I was in elementary school in the 1960s. And I remember they told us to get out. We went in the hallway. We put our heads down. Remember that? Behind our heads. I don't know what that was for. And our bottoms were up in the air. And I'm like, this feels ridiculous. Even as a kid, I thought that felt ridiculous. But I mean, those were the old duck and cover drills. And I remember that. We do that today. We hear the sirens. I'm here to tell you, when you hear the sirens, have you heard the weather sirens go off? Right? And then it's because it's a tornado warning or something, and they're teaching the kids to duck and cover down for that reason. They have absolutely no idea that the sirens that we heard when we were kids would have been sirens alerting us that, you know, we were going to see a flash pretty soon. Okay? Perhaps too close. Okay? For now, it's just weather. My blood runs cold. It's like a Pavlovian response every time I hear one of those public sirens go off, because in my psychology, that means bombs are on their way or missiles are on their way. Okay? It does in my psychology. And so I still have sleepless nights. No, Nick, not about zombies. But I have sleepless nights about what might be left after the nuclear war.
Isn't that because you're committed to join the zombies?
Yeah, that's right, Professor. And so there were other effects on our culture that I think are very interesting that have given us, at least in my generation, I just turned 60, in my generation, that it's still with us today. You know, does anybody here own a swimming pool in your yard? Somebody bought a swimming pool, right? You buy a house, you got a swimming pool, right? Okay. Back in the day, in the 1960s, like the advertisements for refrigerators and swimming pools, there were advertisements for bomb shelters. You know, you weren't putting swimming pools in your backyard. You were actually bringing in a construction company, and you dug deep, and they were putting bomb shelters, and they were advertising, look, these are double bunks, this is for the kids, this is for you, and you can store your food in here. I'm thinking, how macabre is that? How inevitable are people thinking that a nuclear war may take place, that they're selling bomb shelters commercially, and people are buying them, thinking that, hey, this is a great thing, right? And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that, you know, that this thing is going to happen. Okay, and then how does it permeate our culture in other ways? I I'm a big science fiction fan and monster movie fan. When I was a kid, I grew up watching Godzilla and watching movies like this is in the 80s, The Day After, okay? I'm here to tell you, this movie got Reagan elected in 1984. When it came out in 1984, postulating a nuclear war between the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union and the United States, I said, oh man, Reagan just won the election, okay? Because, you know, it was a good thing, right? And then them, okay? Them in 1954, I'm sure Dr. Mao would like this one. It's about irradiated ants, you know, that grew up. And, you know, so we start, in our English language, we get new words like fallout, okay? We get these new words, you know, that we'd never had in our language at all. Mutations. You know, we start getting these new words in the lexicon of the English language, okay? So we're all afraid that the radiation of a nuclear war would cause mutations and we would have freaks walking, or superior people walking around us. I mean, I get to Planet of the Apes and the civilization that's underground, right, you know, and they have this new religion, and there's the high priest that's a mutant, says, may the holy fallout bless all of you. I'm like, my gosh, it's terrible, okay? So yeah, we get these new words, okay? And then I tell my students, you know, whatever you're reading or whatever you're seeing in a theater is nothing more, the publication or the production of that movie is nothing more than the hopes or fears of the time that these books were printed or the movies were being made, okay? That's all it is. It's just a reflection of what's going on at the time. So you go back and you watch TCM and you watch those great movies that they're reflecting, or the books that were written back then, they're reflecting nothing more than the hopes and fears of the time that they were being printed or they were being produced. So what are the big fears? Well, these mutations are going to take place. These giant ants are going to come up. If there's a nuclear explosion test site somewhere and these ants are going to come, they're 8 feet long. Well, obviously that's nonsense and poppycock, right? But when you're a 7-year-old kid and you're watching this, you're going, oh, how cool. And then you start thinking about it and you go, oh, that's a bit scary. You know, 8-foot, 9-foot long ants. Are there mathematicians in this room? Anybody in the math department? That obviously goes against the second law of thermodynamics, or the square root law, the cube root law. I mean, you know, come on. They're going to collapse under their own weight, okay? You can't have giant ants, okay? They wouldn't be able to stand, okay? And so, I mean, we get older and wiser, obviously, but I still believe in zombies. I still believe in zombies, okay? I don't believe in Santa Claus anymore, but I believe in zombies. Okay? So this permeates American society and American psyche. I mean, we're constantly thinking about different aspects of nuclear war. Some movies are, again, cultural, psychological things totally embedded in us. Dr. Strangelove, that movie, How I Learned to Love the Bomb, Stop Fearing and Love the Bomb. Or Failsafe, which came out that same year, which was a more serious presentation of nuclear war. Failsafe is interesting because if you'll notice when you see the movie Failsafe, there's no musical score to it. You ever notice that? There is no musical score to the movie Failsafe. It keeps you in fear throughout the whole movie. Okay, I never noticed that, but of course it does. It keeps you in fear. Okay, now Dr. Strangelove, that's more comedy. It came out first. Okay, Dr. Strangelove came out first. And they came out the same year, within months of each other. And audiences loved Dr. Strangelove, even though it dealt with nuclear war, because it was funny. Okay, there you have Slim Pickens writing down the A-bomb, whooping it up with his cowboy hat, you know. But what else are you going to do if you know you're going to die, right? The last few seconds of your life, you're going to ride it for all it's worth, correct? And General Turgison, my dear friend Colonel Bradle here, says that is required viewing in the United States Air Force now, is to watch Dr. Strangelove. I said, oh my God, okay, great, wonderful, I guess that's a good thing, I don't know. And so, quite frankly, I would make Failsafe the required viewing, but not Dr. Strangelove. But we have this permeation of of the atomic menace, the nuclear warfare menace in our psychology, and of course it becomes cultural now, okay? And we see things in advertisements, right? Like Atomic Cafe. Remember things like that in the 50s? Atomic Cafe, okay? Atomic drink, atomic this, as it was good. And you were going to irradiate you, and radiation would solve everything, a radiation treatment, you know? So radiation was the latest breakthrough for radiation for cancer, radiation for this. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, how many Roentgens are you getting, right? But it was supposed to be the cure-all wonder thing for ailments, was radiation treatment, right? So we have all this cultural permutation going on because of nuclear weapons and the threat of annihilation. No, that's not prevalent. But what are nuclear weapons? Let's dissect them for a moment, okay? Nuclear weapons, again, for those of you who are taking notes, possible true or false question. Nuclear weapons are categorized under what is known as weapons of mass destruction, and rightfully so, okay? They're also categorized under what are known as unconventional weapons. Under this categorization, we of course throw in things like biological weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons, and chemical weapons, right? NBC. Okay. So there's different categories, but we're going to confine our dissection to nuclear weapons for this particular lecture. Nuclear weapons, they produce some effects when they are detonated, and one of the things that I want to make sure we all understand in this classroom is that the United States of America is the only country on this planet that has ever dropped nuclear weapons in anger on anybody. Okay. We are the only ones who have that track record. Okay. We dropped atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki respectively. And that first flash that takes just a blink of an eye, 90,000 people were incinerated in Hiroshima. 120,000 people were incinerated in Nagasaki. That's an interesting track record to have. Why is that, and why is that an important track record to have? And it's nothing to be ashamed about, okay? Please do not fall prey, and I tell this to my history classes, do not fall prey to that mumbo-jumbo that the United States was being racist. If we had had it in time, we'd have dropped it on the Nazis, okay? In fact, that's why it was being developed so fast, because we thought the Nazis were going to have the atomic bomb before we did. So it's not a racist thing that we dropped it on Asians. Please do not fall for that claptrap, hook, line, and sinker. It just happened to be the only enemy that was still resisting, and we had a weapon that we were going to use. And it's kind of interesting. The delivery system that dropped the atomic bomb was the B-29, and the B-29 Super Fortress actually cost more money to develop than the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project was $2 billion. Even that is not chump change today. But it took $2 billion to develop the nuclear technology to explode these weapons. And the delivery system that finally delivered it cost more. And the B-29 was very expensive. And it's because it was a crash program and we rammed it through, and there were cost overruns. But it's interesting that the two systems were married, and they made the ending of the war much quicker. Okay? Anything saves American lives. And so we drop. Okay, so with that knowledge, do you think the rest of the world forgets that the United States of America is the only country that has dropped nuclear weapons in anger? So when somebody on defenseless civilians, mind you, okay? So do you think the world doesn't forget that? So do you think when Trump starts thumping his chest and says, hey, little rocket man, you won't survive long, okay, if you pull your trigger, do you think they're going to be believed? Do you think the rest of the world is going to hold its breath when the President of the United States says, we may go nuclear? You better believe the rest of the world is going to hold its breath, because we're the only country on this planet that's ever done it. seems to be, is Dr. Trickett here? Yeah. There seems to be a Holy Trinity wherever you go, Dr. Trickett. Or sometimes, not you, just in general, where people go. There seems to be a Holy Trinity wherever we go. In nuclear warfighting, there is a Holy Trinity. And it's like a bank account. Some of us have reached financial maturity at different stages in our life, and so we don't just have one bank account where we put all our money. We have a savings account, just another account, we have the fun account, whatever it happens to be, the one you don't tell the wife about. Or maybe the wife's not telling me. I don't know. Anyway, this is my first rodeo. But anyway, having said that, there is a nuclear triad. There is a nuclear trinity, if you will, and there are nuclear bank accounts. And the former Soviet Union, and to this day the Russians, this Holy Trinity had three elements to it. There are man bombers. There are ICBMs. ICBM stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. These are land-based weapon systems. And there are submarine-launched ballistic missiles. We have submarines that are nothing more than floating missile bases. Okay? Having said that, it is where each side was going to invest, like a bank account, most of its nuclear capability that differentiated us from the Soviets, or now the Russians, okay? And each one of these weapon systems have weaknesses and they have strengths. So let's talk about that for a moment. Manned bombers, your B-52s that you're so fond of that you pilot. Manned bombers have strengths and weaknesses. What's the weakness of a manned bomber? It can be intercepted. You can intercept them, okay? They can be shot down. What's the strength? You can call them back. They're manned, okay? If you send them off on a mission with cruise missiles to fire, you know, just outside the border of a particular country, you can call them back and say, stop. They're manned, okay? ICBMs are the inverse. Their plus is that they're quick. An ICBM launched anywhere on this planet can reach a destination on its target on the other side of the planet within 30 minutes. We've had that technology since 1960. Okay, so anybody launches a nuclear missile at us, we can launch one back, the world can be destroyed in an hour. We've had that technology since 1960. Okay? What's the negative of ICBMs? You can't call them back. You cannot recall them. And Nick said in his lecture, you either use them or lose them. Okay? And we had in the 80s what was called launch on warning. I can't tell you the number of times in the National Security Council we get phone calls and we get a warning that, hey, there's all kinds of stuff happening on the screens and everybody needs to take some alerts and we need to take a look at this, and it just turned out to be a flock of geese flying in front of a radar screen. And everybody thought it was a nuclear attack. And I'm like, okay, and we had to be on a hair trigger. Okay, so if we detected a launch, or we thought we detected a launch from what was then the BMUS system, the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System that was across Canada, we have much more advanced technology than that now. We have, you know, over the horizon look capability. I mean, it's just much better. But if BMUs ever detected something, you know, we'd launch on warning because we couldn't afford to have our nuclear capability destroyed. The United States, it put most of its nuclear capabilities in submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The Soviets, being the huge land power and land mass they put most of their nuclear weapons in land-based ICBMs. But they play the shell games. Anybody ever seen the shell game with the pea, right? And you put one pea under the 3 shells. They play the shell game. They would move their missiles from silo to silo. And not all silos. We would never know which silos had missiles in them, underground silos. We didn't know which silos had, and they played the shell game with us. Meanwhile, we would play the equivalent with our submarine launched ballistic missiles because you couldn't find them. Remember, one of the things we always have to remember that 80% of this planet is covered in water. Okay? At any given time, our submarines are lurking at the ocean's bottom somewhere out at sea, where only the captain knows, not even the crew knows what their pattern is going to be. And there is a constant signal from naval headquarters in Washington, D.C. that's constantly going out. And every once in a while, they'll get near the surface and let a buoy go up, and they're listening for that signal. During the Cold War period, if they didn't hear that signal, that meant Washington, D.C. was gone. Right? And they had no choice but to launch their entire packet in a predetermined, on predetermined targets. The destructive effects of nuclear weapons sometimes defy the imagination. Okay? Again, for the math people in this classroom, there are different effects of nuclear weapons. The first effect is, of course, the blast. And then the heat. Okay? And then, of course, after that is the radiological effect. After that, of course, because there will be some contamination depending on how dirty the weapon system is. They're relatively clean now, okay? And so there are shock effects, there are blast effects, which causes pressure and overpressure, okay? Again, there is a differentiation between types of nuclear weapons. Does anybody remember our own homegrown terrorist, Timothy McVeigh? Okay. Timothy McVeigh, terrorist attack. It was the worst terrorist attack before 9/11. And Timothy McVeigh was going to attack the federal government. The way to do that is to destroy a federal building. Remember how he did that? Remember that? It was, he parked that van, or he and his Confederates parked that van in front of the federal building, right? And blew it up on a nice sunny afternoon where all terrorists know you do that around the lunch hour because that's when most people are out, either going to lunch or coming back from lunch. Remember that? Okay? You remember the photographs of the federal building that they took? Okay? It looked like a cake that was cut, a layered cake that was cut, right? A lot of people were killed. Hundreds of people were killed in that particular attack, right? Even the kindergartners that were across the street in that kindergarten were killed. These little kids that were just totally innocent. That was a heinous crime. Heinous, okay? But there's Timothy McVeigh, and he did that. That, ladies and gentlemen, that horrific act was only 1 ton of TNT, the equivalent of 1 ton of TNT. That destruction, that crater, that deep crater and its width and the destruction of the federal building, that was only 1 ton of TNT. The weapons dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had depending on who you're reading, okay, they had the explosive power of 18 kilotons or 18,000 tons of TNT in one explosion. One can only imagine the shock wave and the shock effect of that type of explosion on people that are caught out in the open. The sheer wind effects, and of course they are presupposed for distance, obviously. And the total destruction that's caused by this type of, here we have 1,000 KT and 500 KT. Okay? But it's like being a little bit pregnant. Some nuclear blast. There's distances, pressures. All these have been calculated. An air burst versus a surface burst depends on what kind of destruction you want to wreak. If it's a hard target, there are 2 types of targets, right? There are counter value targets, one word. Counter value targets, and there are counter force targets. A counter value target is some type of, counter force. A counter value target is a metropolitan area, a city of some kind. A counter force target is a military target, right? And so it depends on what kind of destruction you want. If it's a counter force target, you definitely want a surface blast because it's hardened. If it's a counter value target, you want an air burst. Okay? Or depending on the technology you want to use, you can have both a surface blast and an air burst, and it produces a pancake effect. And I really mean a hammer and anvil pancake effect.
Darrell.
Yes, thank you. I'll leave you with this. The heat blast it leaves casualties. And this is just from these are just from the firecrackers of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay? These are just from the firecrackers of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. One can only imagine the devastation from weapon systems that are thermonuclear. And so I leave you with this. Okay? Let us imagine. My apologies to John Lennon. Let us imagine a nuclear burst here in Weatherford, Texas. Using a relatively low-yield nuclear weapon. Casualties immediately will be 14,715 injuries. We'll increase the yield. Casualties, shockwave will do, radiation. That's Weatherford, Texas. We can postulate any other point on this planet. Questions? Is anybody going to get a good night's sleep tonight? Yes, Professor?
Since we live in the world that exists instead of the world we wish exists, are there systems that exist for the purpose of not being used? Second question, which is more likely to invite opportunistic attack, being regarded as unpredictable, a little bit dangerous, or being regarded as soft?
There are no systems developed, to my knowledge, that are not meant to be used.
They're meant to be used, they wouldn't work otherwise, but they work by deterring anyone from starting something like this.
It only works up to a point. The system you're referring to, known as MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction, we war gamed that one when Reagan first got into office, and that only assumes that the other side believes that the other side's going to pull the trigger. If the other side stops assuming the other side's going to pull the trigger, then that one side who stops assuming that's going to pull the trigger.
You have the opportunistic attack.
And that's what we were afraid of.
You deterred that by being unpredictable.
Yes, and that's what evidently the Trump administration is trying to do, is to remain unpredictable.
More power to them.
Yes, well, more power to them. Yes?
You had mentioned clean versus dirty radiation.
Yes.
And what would be the difference there?
There are weapon systems that will create more radioactive effects than the other. But let me leave you with this one. Nuclear weapons, they're outdated. Their utility is not there anymore with the new fuel air bombs we have and the precision-guided weapons we have. We really don't need to use them anymore. I mean, we only had, as Nick said in his earlier lecture, we only had bigger and more blast-effective bombs because, we could only get them within. So now we can put, a cruise missile in somebody's bedroom, and we can see them through GPS. So, the crudity of nuclear weapons isn't really necessary anymore. They're really outdated. Their basic function is the psychological effect of the explosion. It's Wagnerian, that type of explosion would have been perfect weapon for the Nazis to develop. It's Wagnerian. It has a Wagnerian finality to it. But other than that, it's just a psychological weapon. That's all. It's nice to have, like trophy-wise. Yes.
The bad thing was you came in the middle.
Thank you, my friend.